My name is Rebecca Ford, and my current job title is Live Ops and Community Director.
Cool.
Yes.
Current job title. What was your first job title?
Community, no, I think it was just intern.
Okay.
so that actually is true. Intern would have been the first one.
When did you start working here?
I started my internship in January of 2011.
Cool. Had you ever worked in the industry before?
I was still in third year of university, so I sort of just came and never left.
Did you finish university?
I did.
Okay.
I did. No one ever asked for proof, but I did. It's true.
Where did you grow up yourself? Was it close to here? Or?
I am from Burlington, Ontario, which is about an hour and a half away from London, which is sort of in between Toronto and London, like smack in the middle.
And I'm guessing you came to live in London because of the...
I actually came and studied here. So the university I went to is just like 5 minutes up the street.
Okay.
So that's where I studied. And then I had a MIT is the program I did, which is like, not literal MIT, not, no, but it is called MIT. And basically it's like a media studies, and I tried to focus it to be on gaming, and then here I am.
How big is the community team then?
Right now, it's technically 8 full-time, and I have 2 part-time interns from the program as well. So I sort of started as an intern from MIT and then kept that going because I felt that if people were interested in games, that it would be a good fit here. So yeah.
So when you first started working here, what were DE working on? Like, what was your focus?
When I first started, we were finishing The Darkness 2, so that was just sort of at the tail end of development, and I didn't have a role in any of that really. I just kind of came to the studio and figured where I could help. So I was doing like launch parties for the products and just general office things, like not really hands-on. And then I slowly started really wanting to like do that. Well, I always knew I wanted to do that, but I didn't really know how to get started, what to do. And I just stuck around, and then Warframe really started becoming a reality in early 2012, so just mentally, and then it really hit the ground in around July, and I knew at that point that this would have been an opportunity, and luckily the people that I worked with felt the same way, so they were like, yes, this will need community support, and I was like, yes, I will do this. So
pre-Warframe, was there a community team?
No.
Okay. And when did you figure out that, oh shit, we need a community team?
Probably when we realized we were going to do it all ourselves. So yeah. It was like, okay, not only do we need community, we probably need to support these people. So I started the support community forums, all that stuff. So really, when you're talking when Warframe launched, this is 2012. This is us putting an install file on our website that we made in-house with a static background and just base website registration. We didn't even have an in-house web team. We used a local web development duo, really, to sort of stage up the access points to what Warframe was at the time, which was basically a 5 gig install that you sort of had behind one layer of account creation. And we were slowly sending out, a little bit of buzz at the time was getting people to sign up. And then once we had enough people and we felt that the game was barely playable, we let people into this closed alpha. So at that time they were, sending out alpha keys, and people came in, and we realized, okay, people signed up, people are installing, they probably are going to want to talk about the game. So we had forums, and we had, I think, I'm trying to 2012. This is hard, but yeah, I know. But basically, we had a little bit of support. We had the forums up, and then we were realizing that this, could be something.
Yeah. What was the increase in? Could you sense an increase in communication with the community, or that the community was building from that point? Because like there's a lot of games where maybe the amount of people who are playing is rising, but it's not necessarily interfacing with the developer anymore.
I think we were so, I don't want to use the word desperate, but I'm kind of going to. We were so desperate for this to work that we wanted to be in the thick of it as this alpha phase was happening. So we wanted to see what the problems were, where the issues appeared to happen for the game, for the bugs, for all these things. And it really just had us glued to our communication outlets, which would have been the forums at the time exclusively. Just watching, replying, looking, seeing what's going on, like what's happening to our baby, like it's out there. Really, it was a very desperate time. So you're very carefully monitoring the situation, engaging in the situation, playing the game too, to see if this is even the right way to go with our first hotfix, first update, whatever it may be.
So at that stage, were a lot of what was going into those hotfixes, was it predominantly stuff that the development team knew they needed to change, or was it sort of pivoting based on feedback from the community?
So I think early on, if you look at our, luckily we have a wonderful archive of all this information, which I sometimes glance upon just to see, you know, like, what did we do in October of 2012? And the answer is very poorly documented, but documented nonetheless, aspects of the game changes. So things like, you know, changing meshes for Warframes, changing powers, fixing really bad bugs, doing very sort of, at the time, it was a bit rough because we didn't really know what we were after. We didn't know what we were harnessing onto. If you asked us in 2012, and you are asking us in 2012, did you think Warframe would be what it is today? The answer would have been like, what are you talking about, 2018 Irish man? Like, this is not the game that we've made. But yeah, it was crazy. And what really at that time was the most scary was doing free-to-play and doing it wrong, because we were doing it wrong early on. We were selling power, and we were, you know, putting together this market, I guess this access point for our free-to-play ideas, which were, selling power, which was very bad. We had no customization to speak of, really, at the time. We didn't really have a lot at the time, except a fun, free, downloadable game that you could shoot and be a ninja in.
Right. What was that period of time between the PC sort of beta stuff and when it eventually came out on PlayStation 4? How much of a gap were we talking about there? It was like 9 months or something? Or?
Yeah, so technically, so the beta itself on PC going into open would have been March 23rd or 20th, around that time. And the PlayStation 4 was a launch title, so we were in November 2013. So all within the same year, we went from open beta PC to launch title on PS4.
Right. What was the mood at the studio back then? Because it seems like you were already sort of rushing to try and maybe buck some sort of the issues with the PC version, and then also trying to launch on a new consoles. For launch seems like a lot.
It was, and it's never slowed down. So this is the norm, which is, you know, it's great because there's always something going on. But so if you look at basically, so 2013, we'll say we come back to the studio. I think on January 10th, 2013, we took out the pay-to-win-ish things that we realized were horrible. This isn't, and we realized it because the community was like, whether they paid or not, they were hating this thing, and we were like, wow, this really is awful. So out it goes. 2013 starts off with the DNA now slightly, you know, radiated to be fair, free to play. Like we never started this by saying, yes, let's be bad free to play. We said we need to make this game free to play because it's the only way the company is going to stay around. So then we realized, okay, the company really will do its best if this game is fair. So of course you want to do that from the outset. And we realized that the community would kind of have the best perspective on that because they're the ones that are using time or money to participate in this game. And you don't want any of those people to feel bad about what they're playing.
Right.
So 2013 starts off, DNA becomes as strongly rooted in fairness and community as possible. We launch open beta. Total Biscuit does his video around the same time, and then we launch on Steam, and it just, it all takes off from there. And that year saw clans get added to the game, which was a community social structure that was pretty interesting, and we, of course, support it to this day. Whether or not it's supported perfectly, of course, is subject to debate. But yeah, so we're seeing the game take off. We're adding new content. New Warframes are coming out. There's more places to play, and then we have our sights set on launching on PS4.
Right. So, yes. So I guess the sort of pivot. It sounds like that's where the optimism started to come in. Was it like around that moment where you sort of changed the DNA?
I can kind of like put my finger on the most optimistic I'd felt, which was when we started our Founders program, which was sort of our own Kickstarter version of the game, which was basically you can become a founder of Warframe, and that means that you'll sort of have meant it was successful if it turns out to be that way. And I remember watching real time as the first Grandmaster founder purchase came through, and at that point that was someone spending $250 to support Warframe. That was like the moment when I realized people care about this game as much as us, because we're putting the holy last ditch effort into it, and they're supporting that last ditch effort. So we clearly have a relationship.
Right. Was there a worry when you did have that change around that time that you're fundamentally changing the game and maybe people who were complained about it before, or people who weren't complaining will now complain when the people who weren't complaining will be satiated? Or did you kind of know that, oh no, the community is saying we need to rethink the way we're doing this free to play and it'll
Yeah, they were in, there's always going to be a variety of voices within whatever tools you use to communicate. And people were along for the ride early on, which was great. There was a willingness to support the risks we're taking, and if they didn't like them, there was a willingness to tell us. Like there's always been a pretty strong way to talk back and forth about these things, because we started our dev streams that year as well. So February 2013, so 5 years ago this month is when we sat down on the couch for the first time and we're like, all right, what's going on? And then just talk back and forth about it. And that sort of built this bi-weekly rapport of here's what's coming, here's what's changing. Oh, you didn't like that? Let's talk about it. And just so on and so forth. We're on our 106th. So
community sounds like it's listened to.
I think that's what we try. I mean, there are, I think at this point, I don't know the number, but on the forums at least, it's a publicly visible number. So you're talking over 3 million potential voices to talk to. And then there's, on the community team now, there's 8 of us, and then the development team reads as well. So you're talking a ratio of like 3 million to maybe 200, right? So how do you have conversations in that? Well, you try, first of all, at least you try. And you try and build areas of communicating that cover that ratio, which will never be in our favor. And that's something, it's tricky to do, and it's tricky to do right. And I'm not saying that we've done it perfectly, because no matter what, sort of right now, the way people are talking, like I just got back from my desk, there was a video up about like DE does it right and communicates right and all these things. I'm like, that's a really scary microscope to be under. Basically, it's a really scary time to be put on a relative pedestal in the industry, because we've just done we've done our best in our isolated London, Ontario Warframe ecosystem, right? And it's always been that ecosystem alone. Like we've never been under the spotlight in the way that we have in the past even month, I'd say. And it's a little scary because you see the desire of like even, I play a lot of games and I participate in a lot of communities on my own, and I like when devs engage. I like to know what they're thinking. And then you see a lot of angst, and I think a lot of just uncertainty about how much gamers can influence what they play, because they want to influence them, because they like to play, because they spend a lot of time and they spend a lot of money, and we do too, and we like that, and we just like to have that back and forth. And yes, we're going to make mistakes that piss people off, and we don't feel good about it, but sometimes you just are in a, like if you're running Warframe for 5 years now, it's not always an easy 5 years, and it's the best 5 years of my life, no matter what. Like I'm not saying this is grim or anything, but to have a community that feels listened to is probably, I feel like it's a part of my life that I'm very proud of, but I also understand that not everyone always feels listened to in every industry, in every game, and it's really, it's really something special that I hope we can continue to do well.
But that sounds like a very mature response, because the court of public opinion is incredibly fickle.
Yes.
And you can be the on the pedestal one moment and then cast down the next.
Yes. It's very easy to make a single mistake that can destroy a lot of goodwill that you've spent 5 years building up. And we definitely continue to make decisions and release content and iterate on feedback and change things. And that's never going to change. But I think what is changing is the way player bases react to those changes, and we are blessed, fortunate, and extremely lucky to have a very understanding community. And I don't know if that's because over 5 years we have a relationship in that respect. Like it's not like we're coming out of nowhere. We have 5 years here, but I don't know. It's very interesting to watch. I get nervous.
Let's talk about some of those great decisions you made that have worked very well, actually. Actually, you mentioned that you touched upon it, and I do want to touch upon it myself as well. I've watched a bunch of, I've actually talked to Total Biscuit over the past couple of weeks about Warframe, and I watched a bunch of like Jim Sterling's videos as well.
Oh my God, okay.
How important do you think that stuff was? Those videos were at that moment to like get you guys recognized? Okay,
so the original Total Biscuit WTF is Warframe video is definitely like in terms of the the public gamer consciousness, there was a before that video and an after that video,
right.
like no question in my mind. So, and for me, like that was very indicative of how important it is to sort of reach this, you know, this viewership and everything. And I don't want to say that in like a needle finger, like let's get the viewers, 'cause that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say is people love looking around and finding new sources of entertainment. So, you know, YouTube is one of those.
Right.
Yeah.
And it seems like you've been one of the more proactive developers in terms of interfacing with something like Twitch, for instance, especially with the drops. Like that seems like an incredibly clever tool to use it. Can you talk about the idea, like how that came together and how successful it's been?
I think we have a pretty, like we love Twitch. We've been on it for 5 years doing our dev streams, and any opportunity we get to participate in something cool for our viewers, we'll pretty much seize it and work with it as best we can. The drops one, I think a lot of people in our marketing team were privy to basically this campaign, this idea, so they had this sort of vision for what it could be for Warframe, and you know, on the dev side, we had a lot of interest in basically trying something cool with, especially with the launch of Plains of Eidolon, which was, again, I said there's like a before and after Total Biscuit video in 2013, and there's also now like a before and after Plains of Eidolon.
Right.
So it was like this, you know, a huge moment. Anyway, Drops was super cool, and it allowed anyone watching to get cool stuff to support, you know, the Warframe collector mentality or just awareness for the game. And people streaming Warframe were sort of in on it, and it was a bit controversial in some ways. Like people thought we were like view botting and stuff, and it was like, no, this is the power of free shit. So
right.
don't forget that. But yeah, it was fun.
Are you at all responsible for interfacing with Warframe partners at all?
Yes,
Is that
we started the partner program a couple years ago, so we knew we had a lot of, basically it goes back to the first, I think, YouTube video we ever saw of someone covering Warframe, and we were like, oh my god, this could, you know, and we became friends with those people and talking to them, and then we realized there was a way we could make it a bit more special and meaningful. And then, you know, on the community team we had, you know, Drew worked on the partner program first, and now, you know, 2 people support it, and we just have, I think, over 200 partners that cover Warframe. So it's pretty crazy.
Do you think perhaps part of that has to do with the fact that you're not exactly the largest development team in the world, and you don't have like a huge PR machine in-house, that like you were a bit more willing to sort of hand over some of that to people in the community, like to let that flourish? I
think it's like a combination of things. Our pace of development is so fast that really the only people, I don't know, I don't want to say the only people that care about it, but like if we release a new weapon, that matters a lot to the players, and who better to champion that message than a player themselves, right? So you have people on Twitch and YouTube that know the game really well and can really give an interesting perspective on whatever it is we've released, whereas, you know, and the press do a great job of coming into the picture when like it's like it goes beyond the Warframe language, right? Like it's really hard to tell someone that's never played Warframe, oh, the alt fire of this rifle is really great, because they're like, I don't even know what that means. But if you tell them, oh, it's open world, it's like, oh yeah, cool, that's cool. Or like, oh, there's giant bosses. It's like, oh yeah. So there's like a pretty clear line, I think, for me of like, okay, people that like the super fans, right? Like these partners are people that have put so much time into just playing the game and usually loving it, and whether they don't love it sometimes, they also make videos about that, and they tell us like, you guys really fucked up this stupid shit, what's going on at DE? And we're like, oh, oh, that sucks. But
can we talk to, I mean, did you have trouble getting press to play the game? Like, early, or to cover the game?
Early on, definitely. Like there was like the early appeal for press, I think, was like, oh, this is a, like if they paid attention in 2005 with the E3 Dark Sector reveal, you know, like some people remembered that and covered it, and then the game wasn't exactly replayable. Like it was replayable, of course, but it wasn't the best first impression, right? So we're talking early first impressions of Warframe were not the best. Fact. Now it's a different story. I think it's still, you know, the new player experience is a bit tricky, but it's a much different scenario now. And now, thanks to Douglas sitting over there, like I've been getting more press questions now that are from a place of that meta. Whereas before it was like, you know, like the story was great, and we had a lot of great press support from people early on, and then there was some moments where, you know, the game just sort of fell under the radar. And it just did its thing on, you know, a weekly basis. We were churning away. We were never slowing down. Right. We were going. And then Plains of Eidolon happened, and now it's like a different era of coverage, I think.
Right. And you need that tentpole probably to get the media to watch, right?
Yeah, I think a little.
Yeah. What about do you think there was like a reticence to cover it because it had the words free to play attached to it?
I think so. I think at the time that was a soiled,
right,
a soiled diaper. I don't know. A soiled something.
Term.
Yeah. So it was tricky, and again, we were making mistakes early on, and it was the early Warframe was a very different time because it was just like the players loved it, and we had a really strong community that supported us, and that's kind of all we needed, and that's all I wanted to work with. That's it. That's all I needed was someone to talk to about Warframe that would talk back with even sometimes a deeper understanding than I had about why they liked or didn't like something we made, and that to me was like, okay, yes, done. Like, we're good. Let's just keep doing this.
Is there anything that like sticks to you as like things that were introduced to the game between the start and today that the community were like really jazzed about? Maybe not Plains of Eidolon itself because it's obviously such a big moment, but like any sort of like aspects of the game that were put in that people really enjoyed.
I think certainly when we expanded our customization, that was a huge part of what made people like the game better, just at a visual level, which is, you know, you like to look at what you're looking at, I don't know. When we redid the melee system and the parkour system, those overhauls were particularly well received and much requested. So it wasn't that we just like surprised people like, here's a new movement system. We spent months leading up to it, showcasing it on the dev stream, looking at it. We had people worried about, you know, movement nerfs, and we made like A/B testing videos to show them like, this is actually how far you can fly. Like, yes, you've lost a bit of the bugginess of the accidental Zoran coptering, but you've gained a fluid movement set for every Warframe regardless of melee weapon you're using, which was a pretty, you know, that's some Warframe jargon for you. So someone will appreciate that, I'm sure.
Let's talk about the jargon, because like this game is unabashedly unique in terms of like, just let's talk about it visually even, or just in lore or anything like that, in an era in which games are increasingly more and more sort of, they share commonality. Do you think that's to Warframe's advantage, the fact that there is this sort of like, you guys have your own language? It's almost like I feel like it's like goths in high school, right? Where like, you have this like terminology you all share, and you have this like subculture, I guess it is probably, right?
Totally.
And people have to get into it, but once they're into it, then they're kind of in. Is that, do you think within the community, do you think that's like a strength for you guys?
I think so. I think it's a weird organic sci-fi world that is distinct to Warframe. Like that's it, and that art style definitely was the original draw for people to check it out, and it has been the reason that a lot of people stick around, because yes, like the actual gameplay loops and the you know, you can call it the grind derogatory or not, but the grind feels good, at least for, you know, for me, so, and a lot of people that play. But that art style and the wrapping that it's in, and the uniqueness of each character and the level of customization of those characters, like these things are weird, and they are good weird.
And even down to like vocabulary that's used. Like,
yes.
You don't just use the word like cat for your like cat-looking
No, it could not be a cat.
Right.
It's a kavad, of course. That's one thing that we've like tried. Like, there is no internal gospel of Warframe, but if there was, one version of it would have the entry of give everything a Warframe name.
Right.
And you can kind of see how that happened over time. Like early on, we had, you know, one of our amazing programmers naming our weapons. Like the sniper was just called the Snipetron, and it still is. Like, that's still in game. But now you see like names that are appropriate for each faction, and you know, like the Corpus names are Plasmor and like really sort of techie sounding, and then the Grineer ones are like the Stubba and the Stug, and like just like more visceral sounding. And that was an evolved language dialect over time.
Let's talk a little bit about Tenacon. I'm guessing you were involved in that a decent amount from the start.
Yes.
Okay. What was the impetus to do it? And you know, did you think you'd get a lot of people coming out to London, Ontario to celebrate this weird free-to-play game?
Well, we got you to London, Ontario, so
true.
Clearly we 3 years later. But 2016 Tenacon was just an idea to do it on our own, because we had done so much on our own up till then that we felt or at least I felt that I was sick of traveling, and no, I was, but I still am. But the yeah, I felt that we could do it. I felt like our community was tight, like our community would come. I believed in it. I believed they would come. I knew they would, that some portion of the community would want that experience, and it turned out to work. So.
Right. Can you explain what that first TennoCon was like? Like, what was the focus?
Scariest time of my life,
right.
Feeling it would all burn down and fail and be horrible, but it was good and it worked, and we had people come. I think one of my favorite tokens from it is the wall we built of like, sign where you came from and everything, and then you just look at the map. That, like, I went to Chapters and bought a world map to put on it or something, or I think actually might have bought it on Amazon. Anyway, and people started signing where they came from, and of course there's a little Ireland one from, you know, one of our YouTubers is Irish, and you can see he came from there, and then you have Korea and Japan and Russia and like all of Eastern Canada and US, of course, being the bulk of it, but then you're like, holy shit, like people came.
Do you get a sense of where or how people stick around? Is it a type of game where people come and they play for like 3 months and then they bounce out and then they come back, or do you have a lot of retention, or do you have any sense of that?
Typically, like in present day data analysis of Warframe it sticks for a lot of people. Like that is, you know, once you're in, if you're in for more than like a week or so, you've really taken to the game. And the returning veteran rhythm is quite frequent as well, and you can kind of see, like, I think the only publicly available concurrency data is on Steam graphs, so you can sort of use that to get an abstract version of what our, you know, non-Steam plus Xbox plus PS4 looks like in terms of things. And that's actually the hardest part about Warframe's life, I think, is the fact that it's clear from that data that Warframe needs to update to stay alive. The longer we don't update, the less people come check out the game, the less people stay in the game. So you have those two competing schools, stay in the game and come play the game. And then you have us, who has this 5-year, now 30 gigabyte behemoth that needs to be updated to stay alive.
Right.
So how do you explain to someone that you've been talking to that, you know, we will fix your bug, but we also really need to add this new thing, or people won't come? And they're like, well, stop adding shit, you should fix it. And you're like, we have to do both, and we have to do both. And we've been really, really clear. I think over the past year, we've really emphasized that, because it does suck sometimes to have the lens, because again, we're under this microscope, right? Yeah. So the next video that's going to come out a month from now, I'm sure, is, you know, some bug video about how we've ignored the rotting vestigial pinky of Warframe because we wanted to add the new shiny, and that's you know, I think that is something that anyone at a game as a service will have to deal with, and I've seen it happen. I've seen PUBG videos like, oh, they're you know, like you see it, so it'll happen. But yeah, and the health of the game, of course, is determined by those additions. But what's really interesting, going off now, last week we released an update that. Again, you see the health of the concurrency on that, you know, Steam, it goes back up because we released a really, really big update. Right. So you can see it happen. It had some bugs. We're fixing them this week, but yeah, so. There's
an element of laying the tracks ahead of the train, though.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
So that I'm sure has its own difficulties. Then how do you, like, for instance, it seemed like there was a fairly sizable jump when Plains of Eidolon came out.
Biggest in the history of the game.
Right. So is that then terrifying? Because then you're like, oh, we need to crank out one of these big updates every once in a while.
Yeah. Yes, that particular jump was the most insane thing to witness, because that was, for me, my, you know, 4.5, you know, Warframe for me at that point was 4.5 years old. Right. And to see it go to that was like, what are we gonna do? What have we done? Like, will we ever come back to this with our next open world, right? Like, will the next open world repeat this? Is that why people are coming? Have we burned too many bridges because maybe a part of this is something people didn't like because it felt too grindy? Like, it took us 2 weeks after that peak to really balance the economy properly and do all these things, because that's just the pace we work at. So how many people dismissed Warframe because of that right out the gate, or how many are willing to come back right away because the next open world is something they're totally after?
Was open world something that your community was telling you they wanted before that?
This is like the weird 3 degrees of translation, because like people have talked about people had talked about Warframe open world for a long time, and like really only started working on it in 2017 March, right? So we didn't really have anything in the 2015 plans when people were like, oh, make open world. Like, I think we pretty much sat and said, no, 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 because we did say no, because we meant no.
Right.
But the 3 degrees of separation from the community asking for open world versus us releasing it, what was happening was we were doing our routine. And Warframe's routine is great, and it lasts. And it has, sometimes I think it has a saturation point of people needing a pivot for Warframe. So the 2 years prior, the pivot was cinematic quests, right? It came out of nowhere. No one was sitting there saying, I want a story that's going to surprise me. But they were saying, I'm bored. So how do you treat boredom with ambition, right? So you kind of have this repeated scenario where you can see your players are bored. They're asking for stuff, but what they're really saying is they're bored, right? And yes, you can deliver this feedback loop of, okay, we'll buff this Warframe, we'll change that, we'll change these missions, and that matters a shit ton. That matters so much. But to treat the boredom at a different level, you need to shock and awe.
Right. Interesting. It's almost like the things you need to do are A, listen to your community, and B, not listen to your community.
Well,
I'm
saying, like, basically, take your vitamins every day, right? Like, you will be healthy, you will be happy, it's good for you, it's good for us, but, you know, sometimes you need a new flavor, right? So you're still trying to keep the maintenance up of this back and forth relationship, but you need to change things sometimes, because if we had just released a weapon week after week after week after week for the last 5 years, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. What we did do was we continued to release those weapons, but we added cinematic quests, we added Arcwing, we added Lunaro, which turned out no one really plays, which is fine. You're allowed to make mistakes, that's cool, but you need to try.
Right, and it does seem like it's a game that it's sort of built upon different layers of foundations, and there are some aspects that are super popular and some aspects that are, like the PvE stuff or PvP stuff doesn't seem like it's particularly popular, and also hasn't really been updated probably that much, maybe because of that.
Correct.
So at a certain stage, do you start like trimming?
Yes.
Or do you, how does that sort of?
So we've done, I shouldn't be smiling when I say yes, because it makes parts of the community sad.
Right.
Which, like right now, we announced last week that we're trimming something called Trials, which is our only 8-player content type, and it's because we can't really support it properly. It's very buggy, it's very, it's not particularly well populated, but the people that do populate it are some of the more, they love it. So how do you take that away from them and like shake hands and say thank you? Like, it's very difficult. And actually, I think this is the first time we've publicly trimmed something like that at this peak Warframe size, and it's not been a smooth process, because you take away something from someone who's invested 3 years in that game type, not so good. And we sat on our dev stream, we looked and we said, here's why we're doing it, here's our reasons. It doesn't make them any happier. It might make them understand a little better, but at the end of the day, it's, the trimming part, you don't really want to do it unless you absolutely have to.
So can you speak to, like, are there like sub-communities within Warframe that just like to specialize in different things like fashion framing and like, can you speak to some of those?
I think so. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of little sub-communities. There's obviously the customization communities can go very far with what they offer in that respect. There's a lot of, min-maxing communities that are looking for the best possible way to get your loot grind on. There's, the enthusiasts for the pet companions, people that really only play with the cats and dogs and why they defend their choice. I'm trying to think, there's a really, really sort of growing lore community now, like trying to decipher whatever we've added to the game to make sense of it. I think one of the most viewed YouTube videos from someone is like, Warframe's lore until now, and it's 30 minutes of just like, here's everything. Yeah. I'm trying to think about each Warframe sort of has their own fandom now, which is really interesting. Like, there's like diehard Banshee enthusiasts. Like each character has sort of taken on their own, like, people. I guess it's kind of similar like to Overwatch when people are like a Hanzo main or something. Like, we have our version of that, which is pretty fun to watch.
What are some of your favorite Warframes?
Me personally, Nyx was my original favorite. I think Mesa is a close second for me now. She's our gunslinger. And yeah, I really do love them all equally, so it's hard to be like, But Nick's would have been my original go-to.
And if you had any dream for Warframe for the next year, what would you see it be? Where do you want it to go from here? Do you want it to have more players? Are you guys happy with the amount you're playing now? Is there anything you want to fix in particular? What are your sort of dreams for it?
I would say this year for Warframe, my dream this year for Warframe would be that the people that play this game and genuinely have fun continue to do so in ways that we can surprise and delight them with, and that they can come around and feel good about what we've brought to the table for them.